The autumn wind of 1887 carried more than just the scent of dying leaves. Through the streets of Boston's Beacon Hill, it carried whispers, dangerous whispers, that would soon reach the ears of federal marshals and set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the life of Miss Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor stood at the tall windows of her family's mansion, watching the gaslight street below with growing unease. At 24, she possessed the kind of refined beauty that graced the society pages. Auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, intelligent green eyes, and the bearing of someone born to wealth and privilege. But beneath her composed exterior lurked a secret that could destroy everything her family had built over 3 generations. The Whitmore shipping fortune, estimated at over $2 million, had been built on more than just legitimate cargo. For years, Eleanor's late father had used the family's fleet to smuggle goods past federal customs, evading taxes that could have funded entire government departments. Now, 6 months after his death, Eleanor had discovered the incriminating ledgers hidden in his private study, and where she'd learned that federal investigators were closing in. Miss Eleanor, her lady's maid, Margaret, entered the room with trembling hands. "There's been a gentleman asking questions at the servants' entrance. Claims to be from the Treasury Department." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She had perhaps hours, maybe less, before they came with warrants. The evidence in those ledgers would not only destroy her family's reputation, but could result in criminal charges and the seizure of their entire fortune. She needed to disappear, and quickly. But Eleanor Whitmore had never done anything the conventional way. 3 days later, a train whistle pierced the crisp air of Dodge City, Kansas. From the passenger car stepped a young woman in a simple brown traveling dress, her face partially concealed by a wide-brimmed hat. She carried only a small carpet bag and wore no jewelry save for a plain gold band on her left hand. "Mrs. Sarah Coleman," she told the clerk at the Dodge House Hotel, her Boston accent carefully modulated to sound more Midwestern. "I'm here to meet my husband." The transformation from Eleanor Whitmore to Sarah Coleman had required careful planning and no small amount of deception. Using her father's criminal contacts, men who specialized in forged documents and false identities, she had purchased not only new papers, but an entire fabricated history. According to her documents, she was the mail-order bride of one James Coleman, a cattle rancher supposedly working a spread 30 miles outside of town. Of course, James Coleman didn't exist. Eleanor had created him as thoroughly as she had recreated herself, complete with correspondence that painted him as a hard-working widower in need of a wife. To help run his ranch, the local postmaster had been paid handsomely to accept and hold mail addressed to Coleman, creating a paper trail that would satisfy casual inquiry. Eleanor's plan was elegant in its simplicity. She would remain married to the fictional James Coleman for exactly 1 year, long enough for the federal investigation to grow cold, and for her to establish legal residency in Kansas. Then she would quietly return to Boston as a widow, claim her inheritance through a series of carefully orchestrated legal maneuvers, and resume her life with a clean slate. What she hadn't counted on was actually meeting a cowboy. Thomas Tom McCready stood 6 feet tall in his worn leather boots, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of prairie sky. He'd been working cattle for 15 years, ever since his family's farm in Missouri had failed during the economic panic of 1873. Now, at 31, he was foreman for the Double Bar Ranch, respected by the men under him and trusted by the owners who spent most of their time back east in Chicago. Tom had come to Dodge City to hire additional hands for the fall roundup. When he first encountered the woman calling herself Sarah Coleman, she was standing outside the Mercantile, looking lost and more than a little frightened. When her carpet bag split open, spilling its contents across the dusty street, "Allow me, Mum," Tom said, kneeling to help gather her scattered belongings. His hands stilled when he saw something that didn't belong, a leather-bound book with gold lettering that read First National Bank of Boston. Before Eleanor could snatch it away, their eyes met. "You're not from around here," he observed, his voice carrying a hint of suspicion along with genuine concern. Eleanor's mind raced. "No, I'm waiting for my husband, James Coleman, perhaps. You know him?" Tom's expression grew thoughtful. He knew most of the ranchers within 50 miles of Dodge City, and he'd never heard of any James Coleman. But there was something in the woman's eyes of desperation that reminded him of a cornered animal. That made him hold his tongue. "Can't say that I do, ma'am, but I'm sure he'll turn up." Over the following days, Tom found himself increasingly curious about the mysterious Mrs. Coleman. She took her meals at the hotel restaurant at odd hours, as if avoiding other guests. She spent long periods staring out at the prairie, and more than once he'd seen her at the telegraph office, sending messages east with a frequency that seemed unusual for someone supposedly waiting for her husband. Eleanor, meanwhile, was discovering that her carefully constructed plan had significant flaws. Living as Sarah Coleman required constant vigilance, and the strain was beginning to show. Worse, her fake husband's continued absence was drawing unwanted attention from the townspeople, who were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. It was Margaret O'Brien, the hotel owner's wife, who finally cornered Eleanor in the lobby on a Thursday morning. "Now, dear, I don't mean to pry," Margaret said in a tone that suggested she meant to do exactly that. "But it's been near on 2 weeks since you arrived, and there's been no word from your James. Perhaps something's happened to him. Maybe we should notify the sheriff." The last thing Eleanor needed was official involvement. "Oh no, that won't be necessary. I received a telegram just yesterday. He's been delayed by business in Denver, but he'll be here soon." Margaret's skeptical expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but before she could press further, Tom McCready walked through the hotel's front doors. He'd been in town longer than planned, supposedly to interview ranch hands, but Eleanor suspected he was keeping an eye on her. "Double quotes Mrs. Coleman," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I wonder if I might have a word." They walked to a quiet corner of the lobby, and Tom fixed her with a direct stare that made Eleanor feel uncomfortably exposed. "Ma'am, I'm going to speak plainly. I've lived in these parts for over a decade, and I know every rancher, farmer, and businessman from here to the Colorado border. There's no James Coleman, and we both know it." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm afraid I don't understand what you're suggesting, Mr. McCready." "I'm suggesting," Tom said quietly, "that you're running from something back east, and you're using this town as a place to hide. Now, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, and I'm not saying I blame you for it, but folks are starting to talk, and if you keep this up, you're going to draw the kind of attention I suspect you're trying to avoid." Eleanor studied his face, searching for signs of threat or judgment. Instead, she found something unexpected: genuine concern. Against every instinct screaming at her to maintain her cover, she made a decision that would change both their lives. "If I were to tell you the truth," she said carefully, "would you give me your word that you'd keep it in confidence?" Tom nodded. Slowly, "You have it." And so, in the dusty lobby of the Dodge House Hotel, Eleanor Whitmore told her story to a cowboy she barely knew. She spoke of her father's criminal enterprises, the federal investigation, the need to disappear until the statute of limitations expired on the charges she might face. She didn't mention the full extent of the family fortune. Some secrets were too dangerous to share. But she painted a clear picture of a woman with few options and powerful enemies. Tom listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful as the tale unfolded. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's quite a story, Miss Whitmore," he said, using her real name for the first time. "And it explains a lot, but it doesn't solve your immediate problem. People in this town are getting suspicious, and it won't be long before someone decides to investigate your missing husband more thoroughly." Eleanor felt tears of frustration prick her eyes. "I know. I've been trying to think of a solution. But what if James Coleman wasn't missing?" Tom interrupted. "What if he was right here, and had been all along?" It took Eleanor a moment to understand what he was suggesting. When she did, her eyes widened in shock. "You can't possibly mean—" "I mean exactly that. We make it real, at least on paper. A simple ceremony with the justice of the peace, witnessed by a couple of the locals. As far as anyone knows, your husband finally arrived. You got married, and now you're settling into life as a rancher's wife. But you barely know me, and this would be asking you to help a woman in trouble. I've done worse things for worse reasons. Tom's expression was serious, but not unkind. Look, it doesn't have to be real in any way that Ma